All right, another day, another application review. I've been getting some feedback that the application reviews are a bit long, and I understand it's also a bit long recording them. And so today I thought I'd just kind of touch base on some of the main points of this next application here. So this applicant, we're going to call this person Steve. Steve has strong stats, just like the last batch of applications that I've reviewed. If you're new here, I would 100% recommend that you watch the 2 full-length application reviews of our previous applicant, Ben, who applied both in 2019, unfortunately got 2 interviews, 2 waitlists, and 2 rejections, and ultimately reapplies in 2020, in which he gets multiple interviews and multiple acceptances this time around. I think that is a great place to start, just because I show you a before and after of a real applicant with high stats, just like Steve. But you can really see the differences in the way that he portrays his extracurricular activities, right? These are similar activities. He really didn't change much between 2019 and 2020. In fact, I think the only real activity he added was a photography hobby. Everything else was the same. His stats were the same. GPA didn't change. MCAT didn't change. Yet, 2 vastly different results. And of course, there's a lot of moving parts, but a lot of it I think we can attribute to the changes he made on his primary application. Today, we're going to go over Steve's application. Again, a similar demographic, and I'm always looking for more full-length applications to review. So if we have folks who aren't in this 3.9, 519 area, which I know many applicants are, please do send me them, and I'd be happy to review them for the education of the larger pre-med community abroad. Yes. Okay. So today we're going to go over this applicant, Steve. Again, this was reported on June 1st, 12:22 a.m. and submitted just 5 minutes before that. So if you can see my mouse here, I'm going to right click here so you can see it. I think I have a drawing tool as well. Yeah, so you can see here, submission date is what I'm looking at. It's way too big. Here we go. And I believe when I draw, it goes away as well. Okay, so we got a submission day and a report date. So submission day is when he actually submitted it. So he submitted it at 12:17 a.m. on the East Coast, just wanted to get rid of it, I guess. So this is around when it opened, or at least within a week of it opening, I believe, that year. And then report date just means when did he download it so that he had this PDF. So it looks like he submitted it, and 5 minutes after he downloaded it just to have on his computer, maybe to read over again or to have for safekeeping or something like this, for records. Process date is blank, because process date, again, it takes some time for the AAMC to process this applicant's grades and transcripts. Remember, if we scroll down here, or scroll up, I should say, he has courses, and he self-reports the course name, the course number, the course class, as well as the course type and the grade, right? And because you self-report it, many applicants can make mistakes, whether it's intentional or non-intentional, right? Some applicants will try to change their B- to a B, or accidentally change their A to a C. And the AMC has a team of folks who go into the transcript and make sure that just everything is right, right? Also, they want to make sure that you're categorizing your courses correctly. So if you say outdoor beginning tennis is a science class, then they will override you and say, no, that's not quite a science class, and they won't give you science GPA for that. You can see here that the GPA is divided into BCPM, standing for biology, chemistry, physics, and math, aka science, and all other, or AO, which is just non-science GPA, and then you have a total GPA. Okay, so some things to bring up here. He has around a 3.9 GPA, just around there. And other things that I wanted to point out is that you can see that the grades are stratified for the medical schools to see. So, right, if you had a strong high school GPA, you can see that. And then maybe there's a situation where you had kind of a rough freshman and sophomore year. You moved to a new place. You were on the West Coast. You moved to the East Coast. There's no family there. You don't really know anyone there. No one from your school went. And so you start off slow, maybe a 3.2, 3.3 GPA. But because it's stratified, medical schools can easily see your trend, right? So let's say you just started with this bad 3.2, and then you like moved up. And sophomore year did a little bit better, 3.3, and then junior year and senior year you kind of got your chops ready, and then you had double 4.0s, right? Your overall GPA might be like a 3.5, maybe. But medical schools can see this trend pretty easily when they look at this chart, because it's already pre-stratified by the AMC. So don't worry if you start off slow. Many of us start off slow. We're 18-year-old impressionable students who haven't really figured out how to dial in college studying. But the AMC helps you out by kind of stratifying it and say, maybe you're a 3.5 overall, but really you're a 4.0 right now, because junior and senior year you hit 4.0 for 6 straight quarters, 4 straight semesters, and that's the student medical schools are going to be recognizing, not quite the 3.2 freshman 4 years ago, you know. And it also works the opposite way. If you start off hot, 4.0, 4.0, and then you dive down and go to 3.2, 2.9, then medical schools are going to be like, oh, I'm getting the 2.9 student, not quite the 3.65 GPA student, right? So just a heads up that this does get stratified so that medical schools can appropriately assess who you are right now, because you as a freshman and you as a senior, I hope, are very different from a personal and a professional point of view. And again, there's also this this line here for folks who didn't do well in undergrad at all, right? So this is a post-bac undergrad section. So if you went ahead and did a post-bac program or a special master's program or something of the sort after you graduated from college, let's say the entire college you just ended up with a 3.3, right? Good GPA, but not great. And you wanted to increase that, maybe your post-bac was a 4.0, and then because it has maybe less units than your overall college, you ended up with maybe like a 3.4 GPA. But really, medical schools see this 4.0 and they're like, okay, really we're getting a 4.0 student most recently. And in the past, they had kind of struggled to figure out how to study and whatnot. But now we're getting that 4.0 student. Okay, so I think I've kind of spoke at that ad nauseum. Let's move forward here. We have a 519 MCAT score, great score, top 3 percentile, as you can see here, 97th percentile. So that means of 100 students who take it, he scored in the top 3. All right, so just to also clarify, you, by the numbers alone, you would expect this person gets into medical school, and this person very much well does, right? And looking at the numbers, you can look at this table A23. It shows all the total MCAT scores and the total GPAs for people, for applicants and acceptees to medical schools from 2018 to 2021, so over the last 3 years. You can see a greater than 517, which Steve falls into, as well as a greater than 3.79, which Steve falls into. There's only been 9,000 applicants who have that in the last 3 years, so about 3,000 a year, right? 3,000 people in all of the U.S. And remember, 50,000 people apply. 3,000 have these numbers. And of that, about 8,000 get in for an acceptance rate of 86.6, or 5 out of 6. So you would expect that this person does get in. And if I told you he does get in, it wouldn't be a surprise. And the reason I'm actually reviewing this person's application is that not only does he get in, he ends up getting many, I believe double-digit interviews, or interviews at most, if not all. Well, certainly not all, probably not all. But most places he applies to. But he ends up actually earning a full ride scholarship to a school that was top 6 at the time, right? Top 6, top 10, or whatever it was, based on the U.S. News. So this is an applicant who is at the top GPA, and let me just circle this in case people didn't see it, but right here would be his bucket, right? 3.79 and then greater than 517 for an acceptance rate of 5 out of 6. Okay. But he ends up being, I mean, this scholarship is maybe offered to 30 or 40 people in the whole nation. He ends up getting one of those out of the 50,000 people who apply. So I'm showing you this application as an example of the absolute best applications out there, right? He's at the top of basically medical school admissions, earning that full ride to a top 10 institution. Okay? not only does he not have to pay for medical school, he gets paid to go to medical school. It's like a job for him. Okay, great. So let's go over not his entire application, although I will if folks are interested, but I just wanted to go through his most significant, as well as his personal statement at the end, just to give you a sense of four data points that really show you who he is and what this application entails. Okay? You might be very surprised by what you see, and I imagine you will. That's why I decided to go into this. So let's start with the first one, emergency department scribe. Okay. So he does this for about 720 hours over a year, so kind of maybe part-time, full-time job here. Does it with Scribe America. And let's read this together. My time as a scribe has been the most influential in terms of exposure to health professions. You guys know how I kind of feel about things that are difficult to read. I mean, we have to read this again to really understand. My time as a scribe has been the most influential, okay, in terms of exposure to health professions. Okay, so does it mean that he's been exposed to other health professions, or he's been exposed to health professions in other ways, and this was the most influential? All I'm saying is that as a first sentence, after I've read 5 or 6 applications this morning, I'm just kind of like glossing over this sentence, which is not great. You want someone to kind of dial into what you're saying. Okay? By working side by side with physicians for 12 hours a day, okay, my job gives me full access to a physician's work, including procedures, physical exams, and family consultations. Most interestingly, I get to participate in a physician's medical decision-making process, including what decisions they make and why they make it. Okay, great. So this is a contextual description of what he's doing. He's working side by side with doctors. He has access to, of course, their work, their procedures, their physical exams, family consultations. Basically saying that he kind of recognizes the day in the life of a physician. I mean, he spends half a day with them, 12 hours a day, right? That's longer than some doctors' shifts. Most interestingly, I get to participate in a physician's medical decision-making process, okay, including what decisions they make and why they make it. Okay. I have seen over 1,500 patients to date. Okay, I love this, right? It's a simple sentence, but it really, really gets your attention. Not because the number is big or anything, but because there is a number. How many experiences have you read where it's something like, oh, I've seen many patients, right? And that doesn't really get your attention, tickle your fancy, whatever idiom you want to use, but when you read this, I've seen over 1,500 patients to date, you get a sense that, yes, this guy has had true levels of experience. He's logging his patients. He's seeing many of them. He's getting a lot of reps, right? I don't remember who says this. I'm going to butcher this quote badly, but it's like the Bruce Lee quote that's like, I don't fear the guy who has 1,000 kicks, but I fear the guy who has done the one kick 1,500 times or whatever. This is a similar thing where this guy Steve has had over 1,500 patients to learn from, see, speak to. Okay? So it gives you some understanding, and I would encourage anyone watching this, wherever you are, start getting some numbers, like log some tangible things that people can hold on to. Overall, I've grown familiar with the clinical setting, and I'm comfortable talking to both hospital staff and patients. Okay, so this is the comment that I want to make here. This is the entire goal of clinical experience, and let me say it explicitly. It's to be comfortable in a clinical setting with patients. It's not to learn medicine. It's not to be a expert clinician. It's not to be a pro physical exam maneuverer. It's not to learn fancy research methods. The entire goal of clinical experience, explicitly, in the most straightforward way I can say it, is to be comfortable talking to patients and hospital staff. And I like that he's kind of coming out straightforward and saying that. Okay? With these experiences, I was able to solidify my decision to partake in this field of work. Okay, partake in this field of work, kind of clunky, but it makes sense, and just kind of wraps up the paragraph about what he did. Okay, great. The most influential clinical experience was my work as an emergency department scribe. Okay, he kind of really repeats that. That's the first sentence in his first paragraph, right? My time as a scribe has been the most influential in terms of exposure to health professions. Remember, you have really limited real estate. So you want to make sure that you are using your characters wisely. And this, he kind of just repeats the first paragraph. Okay. Here, I learned not just about the profession, but about the work. Again, it's a similar second sentence. By working side by side, I gave me full access to a physician's work. Again, similar. The work that involves 12-hour night shifts on a weekly basis. Again, kind of repeating. The work that can, let's see how he goes from here. The work that can often be mentally exhausting and emotionally hardening. Okay. The work that has become increasingly ruled by the corporate, I'm going to butcher this word, hegemony, something. Corporate hegemony, leaving physicians with little control of their own work schedules, work style, and personal lives. Okay. This is interesting because this is not something you'll see every day, but I want you to kind of step back and tell me or think in your own head what you know about this applicant. For me, I already know that this person is kind of a reflective person, and he is a straight shooter. He tells you exactly what he thinks and what he experiences and what he finds to be true about medicine. Because if you think about it, not a lot of people would say this. Not a lot of people would kind of critique or expose kind of the dirty side of medicine. Remember, he says it's mentally exhausting, it's emotionally hardening, it's ruled by corporate. Basically, he's saying doctors don't practice medicine anymore. Insurance companies do. He's saying something like this, right? Leaving physicians with little control of their own work schedules, work style, and personal lives. That's in direct contrast to many applicants who think like medicine is a stairway to heaven and you get to save people's lives on the daily and people will look up to you as if you're their god and hero, right? There's a lot of rose-colored, rose-tinted glass type writing when it comes to personal statements, and this is a complete opposite. So I want to bring your attention to that. What did I write here? I wrote, this isn't something any premed would say. It's something only expressing their truth would bring up. Others would fear the backlash. So that's interesting. If you wanted to get into medical school, wouldn't it be kind of counterproductive to explain how medicine is becoming decreasingly satisfying, right? So just brought that to your attention. Yet, despite this, the physicians that I work with continue to come back, day in and day out to do what they love. Each patient brings something new and exciting. Each patient brings with him or her the potential to be medically or emotionally complex. Okay, so here's kind of the rose-tinted kind of flip. So he gave you the darkness, and now he's giving you the light, which, again, at the end of the day is like, again, also kind of rose-tinted. But I do respect the fact that he brought the dark and brought the truth kind of up to comment on. I am drawn to the educational nature of this work. Okay. There are some phrases that I've read very, very often. This is one of them. Educational nature of this work. Lifelong learner. Where's the other one? Some form of corporate hegemony in a word, in a phrase that I can pronounce. Hegemony. I don't know what it is. But there are certain phrases that are kind of repetitive, and because they're repetitive and a bit cliche, it's difficult to understand what you actually mean. So I am drawn to the educational nature of this work. Like, what does he mean? Is he learning new hand skills every day? Does he have a patient? Like, I know that every patient is medically or emotionally complex, but I kind of have to take for granted what you're saying here. I'm drawn to the educational nature of this work. I just have, as a reader, I just have to be, okay, I believe you. But past it, there's not much for me to hold on to. For example, if I were to go back to my admissions committee and talk about Steve, I wouldn't be able to remember, oh yeah, he's the guy who's like drawn emotionally or drawn educationally to medicine. Because there's no story, there's no patient I can hold on to. The things I would be able to remember is like, oh yeah, Steve, that's a guy who saw 1,500 patients. At least that's what I kind of remember right now. Oh yeah, Steve. Steve actually really recognizes that emergency room burnout is a serious thing. I can hold on to those things. But this, it's hard for me to hold on to. Okay. And was excited to see that even the most experienced physicians that I worked with continue to learn new skills every day. Okay, great. I mean, I just have to believe you, right? It's kind of hard for me to hold on to that. On the other hand, the work never fails to be the most rewarding thing that these physicians do each and every day. Again, kind of a rose-tinted view on medicine, but fine. I think it's a good contrast based on the truth that he kind of expressed earlier. Despite the hardships, the work incessantly calls out for them to return. The work calls out for them to return. I don't know. It's kind of like poetry. Personally, I found that this combination of learning and service to others has no equal. Okay, I love it. So again, yeah, he's selling himself to really join this profession, so he has to kind of flatter it a little bit. But you can see it's a little bit of rose-tinted, kind of not boastful, but dramatic or exaggerated love for this profession. But it works well because the contrast in the beginning demonstrates that, I do understand it's not perfect, but despite it, I still want to go into it, right? Okay, so let's see if anything else that I want to kind of comment on here. I wrote that numbers always make things more tangible. Said that. And then the other thing is the 720 hours. This experience of 720 hours allowed him to come to this conclusion. Most often pre-meds show empty hours with no reflection. Okay, so yeah, this I think works in conjunction with his 720 hours and his 1,500 patients, just because I can tell he's put in a lot of work over this year as a scribe weekly, right? There's a lot of danger in pre-meds who involve themselves in certain extracurriculars, and it's like 400, 500 hours, and they have zero amount of reflection compared to Steve here. Steve has a good amount of reflection in this second paragraph, but isn't it so, if you were evaluating a student and you saw someone who had 400, 500, even 720 hours in experience but didn't have anything to say about it, you can kind of understand that, oh man, this guy really burned a lot of time without actually learning or reflecting or doing much to be involved, right? Yes, there are extracurriculars that allow you to more easily be involved, but if you're going to be involved with something for 720 hours, 400 hours, 500 hours, we would like to see at least a paragraph's worth of reflection. And you can see, especially in Ben's application, there are a couple of experiences there that have a good amount of hours, but don't really have much substance. And the whole point I'm bringing this up is that those experiences, the ones that people say, oh, you should do, hospital volunteering, you should do that. You need to get rid of those as soon as possible, because it actually hurts you to continue putting more and more and more hours into those, only to get less and less and less out of the experiences. Because at the end of the day, when you write about it and you talk about it, oh man, it's going to be awkward to say, oh yeah, 700 hours. I know really well the layout of my hospital ward, but I didn't really do much. Or you just write these things that no one can really hold on to and remember. So keep that in mind. Just because someone says that you need this experience, question it, because at the end of the day, your experience is going to end up on this application. And if it isn't something that you can happily write about, talk about, and it has triple-digit hours, you're going to be in trouble. All right, let's move on. The second one here, 500 hours. We got a teaching assistant in a prison education program for 3 years. Okay, so this is kind of a longitudinal thing. So let's read this together. He served as a TA for 4 semesters at blank. As a TA, I led and helped facilitate lectures and discussions, graded papers and exams, and tutored students at the Learning Lab. This past semester, I advised 10 honor students. Again, don't you love these numbers? I can go back in a week's time. I can ask you about Steve's application. I'd be like, remember how many honor students he advised at the prison education program? And you'll kind of have a semblance of it, right? You might not remember 10, although 10's a good number to remember. But you'll be like, oh yeah, he's the guy who advised 10 honor students. Okay, because there's a number there. On their final theses in the pursuit of a Cornell certificate. Okay, great. All other classes that I taught are part of a liberal arts associate's degree curriculum. That was wonderful. I also served on the New York Blank Alumni Committee, which connects current TAs with former TAs situated in NYC. In the coming year, I'll be working as the organization's first intern. Oh, that's impressive, right? Typically, when you are the first of something, it means that you made something happen, right? And you should be proud of that. Usually organizations don't kind of like start these internship programs. It's usually the person being like, I really liked working with this group of people and this mission. Like, would you mind if I started, or I was the first intern, and here are my projected roles and responsibilities, and you kind of make it happen on your own. So every time I see someone's first intern or first employee or first something, usually means that they made that happen. Okay? So consider that. There's a lot of things that do not currently exist, but there are a lot of things that you can make happen yourself, right? A first intern, that's basically you taking more responsibility for an organization or their mission on your own shoulders. Like, you're not going to be paid, you're going to volunteer your time, but you're going to be the first person to start up this program or whatnot. And it looks like this is what he did. My duties include setting up a computer lab at blank correctional facility and rethinking what it means to be an undergrad TA. Okay, so this first paragraph is just what he did, right? This is what I wrote. Yeah, all context, here's what he did. So he was a TA, he led 10 honors students, he's teaching some students to gain their liberal arts associate's degree as well as their Cornell certificate. So it's wonderful, right? It's different, but it's still, again, in this like teaching context. So one thing I want to really pull out of this review is you do not need to do everything related. Everything you do does not need to be clearly related to medical school. In fact, it's probably very difficult to read an application that is all medical school related: hospital volunteering, EMT, scribe, clinical research, basic science research. These are just so fundamental experiences to everyone. Everyone needs to have some semblance or combination of these things. But an entire application of just these things makes you honestly look like a pre-med robot, and it's hard to read, especially because folks are reading just so many applications. And so this is different, right? This is a different population, but remember that these skills, I'm sure, translate really well, right? You may not be tutoring molecular biology to undergrads, to freshmen, but he's still helping students, albeit students in the system, pursue their own associate's degree and Cornell certificate, right? So what I'm saying is, if you have something that you're interested in that's outside of medicine, and I sure hope you do, whether it's video games or people in the justice system or basketball or sewing or kittens and dogs, just whatever your other passions are, don't be afraid to pursue them, because oftentimes the skills will overlap, and if not the hard skills, certainly the soft skills of meeting people, talking to people, kind of pushing forward a project, right? That is all applicable to any project of any kind, right? If you are someone who leads a huge, video game team to the national championships, you can imagine that person also being decent or very good at leading a different team, like a healthcare team inside of a hospital or a clinic, right? Similar skills. And even if the skills aren't transferable, because I don't want you to be thinking about, oh yeah, is my sewing sweaters for my cats transferable? You don't need to think about that too hard if you enjoy doing that. But just remember, most often, there will be some sort of things that you're developing and learning that will be applicable. Okay? So let's move on. My time at blank has taught me to attack life with the utmost enthusiasm and appreciation for what I have. In the prisons and juvenile centers that I teach, I've seen how a lack of opportunity can cripple individuals, families, and communities. I never fully realized the level of inequity in our society until now. Okay, so this is interesting. I've never been inside of a correctional facility, but I can immediately kind of appreciate the 500 hours that he went through, right? I'm picturing it in my mind. I'm walking through this like correctional facility. I'm getting ready to teach. And he says that I've seen how a lack of opportunity can cripple individuals, families, and communities. He doesn't attack them for their decisions or their past. He just says, I've seen a lot of people who are here because of a lack of opportunity. And that's a powerful mindset shift for me, at least. He's getting me to engage with his experience and his reflection and his thoughts. I'm gonna butcher this Harry Potter reference, but it's kind of like, I don't remember what it is, but Dumbledore has that little thing, that the pensieve maybe, and it's like just a bunch of thoughts or memories floating around. It's kind of like he's left his thoughts or memories floating around, and I can interact with it based on the way he's writing, right? And you want to kind of have your reader interact with the thoughts and emotions and feelings that you had or have. I never fully realized, okay, I read that. Teaching my students at blank correctional facility, I've seen firsthand that oftentimes it isn't a lack of intelligence or ability, but simply a lack of resources and support that is the problem. Okay, he makes it very clear. It's not their ability, it's not their intelligence, it's a lack of resources. He almost says it's not their fault, it's actually our fault, right? It's actually our fault that they're in here. And again, that gets me to engage with this. It gets me to think, I wonder how he came to that conclusion. I wonder what he's seen. Through it all, it has allowed me to much better empathize with others and have an understanding about how to have conversations with people that are so different from me. Okay, so again, we're getting to a point where this guy is just... We've only read 1.5 most meaningful experiences, and for me at least, I'm getting the impression that this is a really thoughtful guy. Like, he goes through and he does his job, but at the end of it, he really thinks about what he's doing, why he's doing, and he's very willing to share it with you. And this is not, by any means, it's not Pulitzer Prize winning writing. This is simple prose, very straightforward. It's as if he's talking to me, right? You guys all have that close friend where you're just thinking about, I don't know, I just had a conversation the other day about just like this person experiencing homelessness under a bridge. And I just thought, wow, that guy literally looks like he could have had a classic accounting job last week. And now he's kind of in this transit period where he's experiencing homelessness. And so you guys have those conversations with people, with your close friends, where you're kind of reflecting on what you're seeing. And it's just, he's doing the same thing, but just on paper, okay? So he's not really, the powerful part of that is that he's not trying to be someone he's not. He's not trying to speak to an admissions committee member. He's trying to speak as if he was if you two were close friends and just having a conversation at the picnic, just kind of watching people mingle and speak and converse and just sharing some reflections about the week that you've kind of just experienced. That's how I feel when I read this. Okay, let's see. My students are engaged and enthused as it gets, and their optimism, despite their circumstances, has encouraged me to pursue a career of service. Great. The conversations that I have had with them have opened my eyes to their struggles. So again, I like this theme. At some point, 5 or 6 sentences in, with limited real estate, I'd love to switch to another idea or an actual example, right? He's kind of saying the same things 4 or 5 sentences in a row, and I understand it. I understood in the first 2 or 3 sentences. I'd like for him to move to an example of a person so I can hold on to something. Imagine if he brings up Jesse, who has this backstory, and then turn it around, etc., etc. I can hold on to Jesse. More so than I can hold on to kind of these repetitions. For the past 2 semesters, I taught with blank, who let me lead portions of their lectures on my own. Okay, he's talking about his responsibilities. This experience was challenging but rewarding. Through it, I became a better critical thinker, a better adapter, and more confident in myself. I exercised my interpersonal and communication skills, including the ability to simplify complex topics and communicate them clearly to my students. Okay, so in the second half, he goes into kind of a new concept, which is his responsibility as a leader as a lecturer, basically. The problem here, and I'm sure I marked it up extensively here. He says things like this, and I hear this all the time, or I read this all the time. I exercise my interpersonal and communication skills, ability to simplify complex topics and communicate them clearly. Okay. Both of which, again, just kind of phrases that are thrown out there. They're a bit cliche, and it's hard to understand if he doesn't really give you examples, right? Like, how do I know, or what am I supposed to do other than just accept, oh, okay, you exercise your interpersonal communication skills. Oh, okay, you simplified complex topics. Basically, the litmus test that you should all have when you are writing or thinking actually about your experiences, if you're a younger pre-med, is is this something that someone can read once and then like take back and remember, right? And the things that people can really remember, numbers, stories. It's hard to remember, oh yeah, Steve was the guy who exercised his interpersonal skills, or oh yeah, Steve was the guy who simplified complex topics. It's hard to remember that just because everyone writes something similar. Okay, but overall, a very interesting experience. And let's see what other things. Yeah, how do you feel when you read this, when reading this conclusion? So again, the conclusion kind of generic. And then we have the powerful mindset shift that I went over. Okay, so the thing I want to bring up is I don't want you guys to get the wrong conclusion, which is, oh, I have to do something unique. I have to teach at a prison education program, because that's not the point. The point here is that Steve was interested in this population. He found them to be a vulnerable population that he resonated with, and so he did a lot of work there, right? And I imagine there are populations or experiences or passions of yours that you have similar to Steve, right? You may not be as passionate about inmates, and that's okay. They are a very deserving population, and people need, and it would be great if more people kind of supported them and Steve's mission to kind of uplift and change how we see folks in the correctional system. But it's okay if that's not what you're passionate about. For example, I applied to a program at UCLA that served and supported homeless folks or people experiencing homelessness in West LA and Hollywood, and I was rejected. And I was rejected rightfully, because you could tell in my interviews and my application that I was really only trying to get into this activity because it was known as the like hot, sexy, competitive activity at UCLA, right? Only the highest of high pre-meds were able to earn an acceptance to this program. And not only could they tell, and they were the ones making decisions on my application, but I could tell. I could tell the second I submitted it that I was just trying to squeak by and just get in, just get a clinical experience, as every pre-med is hungering to do. But that is the first door. And there's a wonderful book by, let me look this up. It's a wonderful book by Alex Banayan or something like this. But he's an 18-year-old college freshman when he wrote this book. He sets out from his dorm room to track down Bill Gates, Lady Gaga, and basically like Oprah and the world's most popular, well-known people. And he does it by this concept that he writes about called the third door, which is his book that I would recommend. Basically, there's three doors, right? The first door is, I'm going to kind of butcher this, but please do read the summary if you're interested. I remember the first door is like kind of, if you're going into a club, the first door is the one everyone waits in. There's a bouncer at the front checking their IDs, and slowly but surely, you eventually get in. I was trying the first door, right? Getting in through applying, just trying to sneak my way under the radar and just get that clinical experience because all the greatest pre-meds had that experience. That's the first door. The second door is if you have connections, I believe. It's like if you're wealthy, you're famous, and that's the VIP door that the second bouncer in the back kind of opens for you, and you kind of come in under the security guards that you've personally hired are covering your head to block the paparazzis, and you eventually make your way in. That's the second door. People with connections. And for medical school, that would be things like folks who have doctors in the family and they're able to get them experiences and research projects and start them on, patenting and, those crazy pre-meds who have seemingly everything. That's the second door. The third door, as Alex Banayan kind of talks about in this club analogy, is he says the third door is actually like the door that the kitchen staff use to get their trash out, or the window that's kind of airing out the club, right? The third door is like the door that no one takes, but is still an option to kind of get in, right? And this, I would say, is a great experience of, a great example of kind of a third door approach. There's, as far as I understand, there's probably not a lot of competition to become a TA at this prison education program, to become this organization's first intern. I'm guessing that he made this path for himself because he was interested in this population, and he decided to continue to increase his roles and responsibility, continue to work with these people, and continue to elevate what he did for this organization. That's the third door. I'm sure there were organizations at Cornell, which is where he went, that were very competitive, and every pre-med applied to, and he could have waited 1 or 2 years to finally get his turn. But instead, he decided to do this, and this ended up being his most significant experience, and I imagine one of the huge reasons he earned a full ride scholarship. Okay? So what I want to encourage you to do is, 1, read The Third Door by Alex Banayan, and 2, figure out what your third door is. What are your passions and your kind of other medicine adjacent things that you could be first in line for, be the most suitable applicant for, so you can get an experience that ends up being your superstar experience that isn't the same thing that everyone else does. That's what I want you guys to get out of this. And again, it doesn't have to be something like prison education. It could be literally anything that you're interested in. All right, let's finish up here. We're going a little bit long. We got this third one. This will be quick. So this is a cognitive systems and neuroscience lab, about 800 hours over 3 years. There's not much to say here, but I'll read it. Perform volumetric cortical and connective brain analysis using voxel-based morphometry, free surfer software, develop my own projects, studying the comorbidity of math and reading disability, was transformed into one paper, and one poster. In addition to performing brain analyses, I worked extensively in Excel to match behavioral stats and perform statistical analyses. Finally, I assisted with data collection, attending fMRI imaging, and behavioral test sessions. Okay, classic cognitive neuroscience research, basic science, translational science, kind of hybrid here. These are just all his roles in the first paragraph. Imagine if I were a cardiologist, kind of on the admissions committee reading this. A lot of this wouldn't make sense, right? So what I kind of get out of it is like, okay, he had his own project. It became a paper and a poster. He has some Excel, and he did a lot of the different parts of the project, from data collection to attending imaging sessions and behavioral sessions. Okay, great. My work at Blank combined my passions for education, technology, and science into one. During my time here, I started and ran my own project with the help of my advisor. Again, kind of repetitive. He's already saying this in the first paragraph. It was empowering to be able to develop my own research question and choose my direction to research. Okay. The work was heavily infused with technology, and my data science background allowed me to apply the coding and data analysis skills I learned in the classroom to my work. I learn new things every day, whether it be a research tool, a new paper, or more general skills. Okay, again, we had this concept of learning before in the scribe experience, and you can see, again, it's kind of vague. I learn new things every day, whether it's a new paper, a new tool, or more general skills. It's kind of hard for me to take away. As a thinker and a research scientist, I learned to appreciate the collaborative nature of this work. I loved embarking on deep dive conversations with my mentors or other senior members of the lab, during which I would learn as much as I could from them. Okay. I also gained appreciation for the iterative nature of research science. Okay, this is interesting, which helped me work on my patience and attention to detail. Okay. This experience also taught me to be fully responsible for my own project start to finish. I learned that failure is not only expected but necessary to steer one's project towards the end goal. Over 2 summers, I truly immersed myself into the project. Although nowhere near an expert, I developed expertise in a fairly technical and esoteric field, which I am proud of. Okay. I guess what I will say, let me just read my comments here. So the first paragraph is all his roles. The second paragraph is he has his own levels of freedom, right? This was his project. He designed the questions. He was responsible for it beginning to end. He has a unique skill set in data science. There's a lot of sentences that don't really say much, and I've kind of highlighted them and made a face when I read them. So I'm sure you guys know which ones I'm talking about. But overall, I think I would have just wished to understand, kind of in lay terms, what his project was about. So for example, when I wrote about my stroke recovery project, I also kind of made this mistake where I wrote it in a way that only people that really understood voxel-based morphometry and comorbidity of math and reading disability would kind of understand. I don't really understand what his question is, right? So if I were to explain my project in a way that I think anyone could understand, it would be something like this. Many people get strokes. When you get a stroke, there is a portion of your brain that dies or becomes dysfunctional. Say, for example, you can have a stroke in the left motor region of your brain, and that can kind of impair the function of your right arm and leg. Over time, interestingly, some patients do regain function of their right arm and leg. But interestingly, even more interestingly, when you look in the brain responsible for the portions that should control the right arm and leg, the left motor cortex is what I'm kind of talking about here, you can see that that part of the brain is still dead. So the question is, what part of the brain, or how is the brain still moving your right arm and leg when the portion of the brain responsible for it is now dead? That's an overtly simplified version of my product, or not product, but my project that I was working on. But it's more like I can hold on to this, right? I can go back and say, oh yeah, he was working on stroke recovery. He's trying to figure out what portions of the brain kind of take over dead portions of the brain, because we see that experience in humans, right? I give you this context, I give you the story, and I give you the question we're answering. He does that in the first paragraph, but I think in a way I still don't really understand what he's doing. And in the second paragraph, it's a lot of reflection. Again, I don't mind reflection. I just wish that there are a couple more stories and more tangible things. Like I would have loved numbers here, how many patients he worked with, et cetera, et cetera. Just so I have something to hold on to. Because otherwise it's things like, I learn new things every day. I learn to appreciate talking with my mentors. I learned that failure is not expected but necessary. Overall, you can see this is a very reflective guy, right? And you've gotten that impression over the last 3 experiences. They're very straightforward. He tells you exactly what that experience meant to him. And it's great. I personally would recommend giving something more to bite on so that the admissions committee can remember and support you when they go back and talk to their colleagues. Okay, so let's see. I have a summary here. But I will get to that after I read this personal statement. Let's get to this personal statement, the meat of this video here. All right, let's read it. Off of New York State Route blank sits blank correctional facility, a state-of-the-art maximum security prison. But in the blank, the facility houses over 1,500 inmates, kept in check under the watchful eye of correctional officers and an all-seeing, all-hearing security system reminiscent of that in 1984. There's an eeriness to the place. Unlike older maximum security prisons such as Blank Correctional Facility located less than 30 miles away, Blank does not immediately feel like a maximal security prison when you walk through its corridors. Okay, again, some comments. Numbers make things more tangible. Medical school apps are more storytelling than they are resumes, right? As you can notice, this first paragraph has nothing to do really with him and his resume. It's really just painting you a picture. And then at the end, it doesn't immediately feel like a maximum security prison when you walk through its doors. That's a turn, right? So it is a maximum security prison, but it doesn't feel like that, even though it houses 1,500 inmates and it has this all-seeing, all-hearing security system. Okay, so I'm kind of spooked out when I'm reading this. Let's keep going. It has no traditional prison yard. Rather, inmates are separated into blocks, located at different points along its main corridor. This corridor is Blank's defining feature. It's a mile-long, airtight, gray and white hallway out of which extends all the facility's spaces. Inmates, officers, staff, and volunteers, like me, must all traverse this corridor to get to where they need to go. Cameras dot the ceiling every 100 feet or so, spaced just far enough to remind you, just when you are close to forgetting, that someone is watching. Oh man, this guy, Steve, should be a crime writer or I don't know, just an author. This is just a beautiful description. Barred windows line the walls at around the same interval length, designed in such a way that your view out of each window stays within prison walls at all times. Oh wow. You can only see other parts of the prison, never what lies beyond. Oh, architecturally, the facility is unrelentingly suffocating. I like to think of it as blank. I like to think of blank as a space with no space. That is such an interesting phrase. It takes every possible measure to dehumanize the people inside its walls. So he spent the whole first 2 paragraphs painting you this picture, and it all summarizes into this. This is a place that does every single thing possible to dehumanize whoever lies within. Oh, man, and all of us, I mean, I certainly do not have the writing prowess that Mr. Steve does here, but there's some beautiful phrases that you for sure will not forget. A space with no space. Every possible measure to dehumanize yourself. To remind you when you are close to forgetting, someone is watching, right? Okay, a mile-long, airtight gray and white hallway. Everything's black and white, gray, same length. It's all monotone. He's painting you a picture. Do you feel how suffocating this is? Okay, I hope his writing kind of speaks for himself. Inside blank prison education program classrooms, CPEP, I take pride in creating spaces for my students to escape the facility's oppressive nature. Okay? I like to think of CPEP classrooms as a space for creating space. So it's a nice contrast to a space with no space, right? His classroom is a space to create space, not just physically, but intellectually, creatively, and emotionally. In fall 2017 introductory biology, my professor and I flipped the classroom and urged our students to guide discussions with their questions rather than lead traditional lectures on our own. Okay, so flipped classroom style. Classroom became a space for our students to speak for themselves, to ask questions on their own terms with the expectation that their voices would be heard. This doesn't seem like it's important, but it's huge in contrast to the 2 paragraphs prior, right? This is a space where you imagine people, the inmates or the students, do not get listened to. They are only instructed what to do, but he flips it. And he says this is a space for them to ask questions on their own terms with the expectation that their voices would be heard. Each week, our discussions grew livelier and our students more passionate. The only thing limiting our discussions was time itself. Okay, wonderful. Inside the classroom, we created a space for our students to reclaim their humanity. Man, just look at the 3 concluding sentences of each paragraph. At least the last 2. So the last one was, it takes every possible measure to dehumanize the people inside its walls. He flips it here. Inside the classroom, we created a space for our students to reclaim their humanity. The reason I'm going through this personal statement is you got to learn, and not learn, but you guys got to see this personal statement is a story. It's not an autobiography. It's not a resume kind of repeated. This is a story. This is J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter. This is a true story. Okay, let's see what other comments I wrote here. Okay, in comes the applicant. So after the first 2 paragraphs, I heard nothing about Steve, but here we go. Steve's here. I take pride in creating spaces, so a little bit late, but that's completely fine given the beautiful context he gave us. And then they flipped the script for these inmates, created space when there was none. Okay. Next paragraph. Our students never fail to take advantage of the space. They are some of the most enthusiastic, motivated, and hard-working learners that I've ever met, which includes my peers at his college. Their positive attitudes have inspired me to appreciate all the things that I take for granted in my own life. To witness these people who have been cast aside by the rest of society show up to class with smiles on their faces has inspired me to better myself. To hear such intelligent, thought-provoking conversations go on inside prison walls has shattered all of my preconceived notions and stereotypes of incarcerated people. Okay. Wow. So, again, you get this. I feel like I know this guy, although I do know this guy. And I hope that you feel like you know this guy, not where he's been and what he does or what he cares about, although you can get a sense of that. But you can get a sense that you can get a clear understanding that this guy's really reflective, very thoughtful, and very willing to share kind of his emotions, right? He's met these people who have been cast aside by the rest of society, and them have inspired him to better himself. I just believe it, because in the last 3 most significant things that we've read together, he's always been a guy that's really sharing you his thoughts, really reflective. He's not a rigid businessman in a suit saying, I got 1,500 patients, 25% efficiency, $3,700 in revenue. This is a guy that's like, oh yeah, people don't recognize these students as humans. But because what I've seen and the discussions that I've partaken with these folks, they've inspired me to become a better version of myself. And I just believe it's almost like he's a motivational speaker. But I just hope that you recognize how reflective he is. Okay. And then this last sentence, for me, sparked a relationship to medicine. And notice that he hasn't even said the word medicine once yet. But you can read this last sentence. To hear such intelligent, thought-provoking conversations going inside prison's walls has shattered all of my preconceived notions and stereotypes of incarcerated people. And I wrote this question: can you see why this trait would be powerful for an MD to be, right? It would be very powerful to have a provider who has gone through an experience that recognizes, man, I have completely obliterated the notions and stereotypes of underserved people, incarcerated people, undocumented people, right? Can't you imagine this person as a provider? All right, go on. My students' attitude towards life reminded me of my own grandparents, who I grew up with. At a young age, I remember my grandparents constantly telling me how important it was to maintain good health. Okay, this is a transition. At the end of the day, they would say, all you have is your health. As a child, I never quite understood what that meant. I would roll my eyes every time my grandmother ran out of the house with a sweater, urging me to bring it to school in case it became cold later in the day. I wrote a comment here. Can you rebite? Oh, can you relate? Okay. Yeah. So for me, coming from an Asian household, this is something that I feel like I go through like daily or weekly. My mom asking me if I have water, my grandmother asking me if I have a sweater. And I just like these details because we went through an entire page here where a lot of it I couldn't fully relate with because I don't understand all these experiences. But now I'm getting to a point where like, oh yes, I can relate with this. In fact, it took going to prison to begin to understand why she made such a fuss about it. My grandparents and parents came to this country from China over 30 years ago seeking certain unalienable human rights that China did not afford them. Yet they understood the obvious, that the ability to access these rights rested on life's ability to sustain itself. Okay. This is a difficult sentence to understand, so I'm going to read it again. Yet they understood the obvious, that the ability to access these certain unalienable human rights rested on life's ability to sustain itself. So basically, they left this country looking for human rights, but also recognized that to access these rights, you'd have to be alive. They understand that a full life assumes full health. Okay, that's a great summary. As a scribe in the ED at Blank Medical Center, I witnessed this firsthand. When patients visited the ED, everything else, jobs, relationships, etc., was put on pause. Sounds like your girlfriend breaking up with you is not that important when you're in the ED. So, I like this. It's like I can understand what, even though I've never been a scribe, even though I have very minimal ED experience, I can understand what he's getting at. In moments of sickness, life waits patiently on the side for sickness to be defeated. I also love that when he's going through complex topics, he has a sentence that's very straightforward and clearly tells you what he means. My grandparents understood this. My grandparents taught me to value life because they grew up in a time where their country's leader at times did not. They cherished life because their lives were not always cherished by others. Okay. Again, he's doing this. They cherished life because their lives were not always cherished by others. In moments of sickness, life waits patiently on the sidelines for sickness to be defeated. They understood that a full life assumes full health. I like this structure where it's like hardcore, complex topic, simple, straightforward reiteration, right? And he does that 3 times in a row, and it works really well. Life comes first, a simple yet powerful proclamation. Okay. And here I wrote that the ability to access those rights rested on life's ability to sustain itself. And then he brings it to himself in the ED. But my comment was an extension of a fundamental principle, a qualification. Okay. So he extended this fundamental principle of unalienable human rights, and he connected it to medicine. To access those rights, you must have health, right? I don't know. I think the unalienable rights comes from, I don't know, the Declaration or the Constitution or something like this. Life, property, and whatever it is. But I don't believe that the assumption or the inclusion of full health is a part of it. And so I like that he makes that extension on his own. It shows that he's really gone through these concepts in his head many, many times. That doesn't come out just out of thin air, you know? My students at blank, many of whom grew up in this country, were stripped of life themselves. So they cherish every moment in the classroom because they feel that it is the only place in the facility where they can engage with some of the most basic elements of life. Critical thinking, discussion, learning. So he's making a big statement here that at its core, life is discussion, learning, critical thinking. And if you have someone who believes that going into medical school, you can imagine that they will end up as a pretty great physician. Okay. Here, they create spaces for themselves in a facility with little space. Again, the space concept is very interesting. In doing so, they exercise some of those unalienable rights that blank robbed them of, that my grandparents and parents found in this country. In these spaces, my students found some life. My students have taught me to cherish life and see the inherent goodness in all of it. They, along with my grandparents, have pushed me towards a career in which I can help preserve it. Okay, so finally in the last paragraph, you kind of get this bridge. And his concept is that there are people who are in search of the basic definition of life. And he's met these people. He's met the inmates who have been stripped of life, and they find it in his classroom. He has been intimately aware with his grandparents who came to this country because their lives were not respected in their home country. And he connects that concept, this basic necessity of life, these basic elements of life, as being intimately related to the emergency department, to health as a whole. In the end, when I read it, I'm like resolved. I'm like, oh yeah, that all feels right. But when I'm kind of reiterating to you, you can see I'm kind of lost in a couple of points. But overall, I think the sentence, a full life assumes full health, in conjunction with the fact that there are some people who are stripped of lives themselves, who cannot engage with the most basic elements of life, that kind of paints this full picture that he wants to at least give people the basics of life. And his way of doing it is not by, creating some space in the classroom, although he has 500 hours of that. It's not to help immigrants leave their home country to come back to America where they can have alienable rights offered to them, unalienable rights offered to them. He's going to a career which he can preserve human health. And that is his fundamental understanding of how to help these people get their most basic elements of life. So the bridge is there. The bridge between restoring people's basic rights to life through preserving itself. That is his answer of, remember, the personal statement has a very simple question. It's, why do you want to become a doctor? And he wants to become a doctor because he wants to restore people's basic rights to life via preserving people's health as a fundamental portion of restoring their rights. This is my favorite question of the whole piece. How many times did you see the word medicine? Yet how many times did you think this person is going to be a sound doctor, right? There's a lot of parts here that, the only real medicine-y part is here, right? The medical center, the ED, maybe this half paragraph here. But you see a lot of this reflective, straightforward individual who doesn't have preconceived notions and stereotypes of incarcerated people, who cherishes life and sees the inherent goodness in all of it. You see this person who understands how important it is to give people full health. Because not only do they go home, have dinner with their families, they don't have to worry about their health in addition to their jobs, their relationship, their car payments, and all of that. He makes it clear that a full life assumes full health. So he finds taking that role to be one of the most critical things anyone can do to give people back the human rights that he's been so intimately involved with. He's been intimately involved with people who do not have those basic human rights. So all in all, a very storybook personal statement. One where you can notice like he didn't go through probably 90% of his application. He only went through the prison inmate correctional facilities and then the ED and then his story with his grandparents, which is not in his work and activity section, right? This is not an autobiography. And this is, it might be an autobiography for you, but the question is, why do you want to go into medicine? Why do you want to become a doctor? And for him, this is his way of reflecting and just sharing that becoming a doctor pays homage to the people that are in this correctional facility, pays his respects to his grandparents, right? That's why he wants to be a doctor. Not a very easy thing to write, but I thought I'd share just how powerful it is. Because now if you've watched all the way through, you don't need to be an admissions committee member to remember this story. You will for sure remember his grandparents, the ED, the prison inmates. You'll remember the first 2 paragraphs if you just close your eyes and picture what it's like walking down that mile-long, gray, suffocating space with cameras every 100 feet. And you can write that way in your work and activity section, even though you have less characters. You can write that way in your personal statement. You can speak that way in your interviews. You want to give people things to hold on to. And the only way to really do that is to do things that you genuinely enjoy, not because someone else says that you should do it, not because a website says that medical school admissions find clinical hospital volunteering to be the most important thing you can do. Not because of any of that. It's because you care about these things. And even though it's not directly related to medicine, even though none of this, I think medicine isn't even said once, medical center is said once, you can tell this person is going to be and is a great student doctor and will be an excellent physician. Okay, so there's some summaries. We have strong GPA, all A's, select A's, A minuses, 2 B pluses. We got a 3.9 GPA with a 517 MCAT. These are his extracurriculars that I didn't go through completely, but we have the 3 most significant, the Scribe America, which is med-related, the research, which is the cognitive science research, neuroscience one, and then the incarcerated prison education program, TA. We have personal statement. The details just absolutely suffocate the reader. It allows a glimpse into his new world. And honestly, I've never been in a correctional facility, so for me, it was like going into Narnia or going into the wonderful wizarding world of Hogwarts or whatever. It's just a beautiful picture that he's painting for you. Overwhelmingly reflective applicant. You can see that through all of his writing, the most significance, the personal statement, everything. I wrote that he's wise beyond his years. I felt that way when I was reading it. He convinced me that he'd become a great doctor without saying doctor or medicine or passion or any of those cliche things. And that is the goal. That is where you want to eventually get to. And the way to get to that, if you guys aren't currently writing your application, the way to get to that is to recognize that, so to get to this point, let me just draw kind of a whack diagram here. But he might be here. Let's just say this is 100 at the top, right? If he's here, in order to get here, it's not writing practice. You don't need that. Although you will need writing practice or just some inherent skill to get to his level of writing. But that's besides the point. What you will need are extracurriculars that truly resonate with you, things that you can truly reflect on and are meaningful to you in order to get to a point where you have the firewood, the fodder, the timber to build a fire that that is his personal statement in his work and activities section. You need the supplies, right? And you're not going to get the supplies if you're out here doing hospital volunteering experiences because your mom told you to, doing, I don't know, Thanksgiving food kitchen runs because your cousin, who is now in medical school in Iowa, said that was what she did for volunteering experience, right? You should do those things to try them. You should try everything, because 5 hours here, 10 hours there, 50 hours there, you have 4 years to really, you have a lot of time, essentially. So you shouldn't ever say no to anything. You should always try it. But once you have tried it for an amount of time you believe to be enough to understand it, you should let it go. And you should stop doing it just because other people are doing it. You should stop applying to things just because other people are applying to things and it makes it look competitive. You should realize here that, Scribe America, every man and their mothers has it as a gap year job. Cognitive science research, every man and their mothers has some sort of research for a couple of years. But this is really the star of his application, right? He has a strong GPA, strong MCAT, just like 10,000 other people. But he's one of the 50 people in the nation to get this full ride scholarship. And it's because he's an overwhelmingly reflective applicant. And he's a person who took the third door and he got his own experience, he reflected on his own experience, and he has a very strong reason as to why he wants to become a physician, right? He wants to become a psychiatrist for people in the correctional facility system. So consider that. I understand that medical school admissions is a game that we all have to play to some extent, just because there's a lot of moving parts and you don't want to be taken out of the running for for a technicality. Like you don't want to miss your rolling admissions. You don't want to turn in things that are incomplete. But at the core of it, you want to figure out if you want to become a doctor. And the way to do that is to pursue experiences that are meaningful to you. To get some experience clinically with patients, with people that are meaningful to you. And there's no way around it, right? There's absolutely no way around it. All right. So for the last bits, I guess I'll make my head bigger. But hopefully that was helpful. Let's just do this one. Yeah. Hopefully that was a helpful breakdown of his application. Do this. Yeah. If you'd like to see more, let me know in the comment section below. I know these are longer videos, so they're a bit of a trek to kind of read and follow all the way through. But if you have any other ideas as to what you'd like to see next, I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. You'll find my contact information also down below. Those are the easiest ways to contact me. And yeah, I think that's it. I have a medical school chances quiz at the end, also linked down below. It'll calculate where I think you are overall in your medical school journey. Go ahead and take that so that we can stay communicated via email. I'll send you the results of this quiz, and we can figure out how I can best help you if you need anything. All right? So, great. Thanks for staying here for the entire thing, and I'll see you for the next one. Have a good day.